Venezuelan security forces round up more traitors as investigations into Sunday's foiled terrorist attack advance. Algeria calls for a truce in Libya and Yemen. And the World Health Organization pours cold water on U.S. claims that the coronavirus came from a Chinese lab. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo in Quito, Ecuador. This is from the south. Venezuelan authorities have captured another 8 traitors in Chuao, Aragua, in a developing civic military police action. Among them, Antonio Sequea, who headed the so-called Operation Gedeon and who participated in the April 30th, 2019 coup attempt along with Juan Guaido. The deserter of the National Guard was seen on the Altamira distributor alongside right-wing fugitive Leopoldo Lopez and a number of military deserters. And one of the mercenaries captured was Josnar's Adolfo Baduel. He admitted there were 2 U.S. citizens in custody and that they work for U.S. President Donald Trump.
In the group, there are 2 Americans, 2 gringos.
They're detained now.
Where do they work? What do they do with you all?
They are intermediaries. They are part of the security team of the President of the United States.
Of Trump? Who said that? Did they themselves say that? Repeat that.
They say they work for the security of the President of the United States.
Who is the President of the United States?
And early on Sunday, the latest U.S.-backed terrorist plot against Venezuela took place. Armed mercenaries who departed from Colombia tried to enter the nation by sea, but were met by a crushing response by the Bolivarian armed forces.
Like clockwork, official voices from the United States initiated a countdown that was echoed in social media. The chronicle of an announced attack continued into the early hours of Sunday, May 3rd, with the spread of videos that showed alleged clashes and helicopters circling the Macuto area, in the coastal state of La Guaira. Venezuela's intelligence agencies confirmed the neutralization of an attempted military raid by sea that set off from Colombia.
These terrorists tried to enter using speedboats through the state of La Guaira, but thanks to the timely actions of our Bolivarian armed forces and the special forces of the National Police, some were neutralized while others were detained.
This military operation was aided by civilian forces. According to authorities, the deserters and mercenaries will take shelter in this house, from which they would carry out terrorist acts and would target officials for assassination in the latest attempt at a coup.
Detrás de esto está Estados Unidos.
Behind this is the United States, the Colombian oligarchy, and the drug traffickers.
La Fuerza Armada Nacional Bolivariana.
The Bolivarian Armed Forces, through the defense minister, declared absolute loyalty to President Nicolás Maduro.
The armed forces are on alert across the nation.
Authorities have declared that investigations are ongoing and further detentions could be coming.
Rolando Segura, Telesur, Caracas.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro addressed the failed terrorist incursion that took place on Sunday, May the 3rd, in La Guaira state. He did so at the virtual meeting of the non-aligned movement in response to COVID-19.
Yesterday, May 3rd, Venezuela faced a failed maritime incursion from mercenaries and terrorists trained in Colombia, with the financing of the government of the United States and the current government of Colombia. That group of terrorists was confronted by the Civic Military Police Union. The terrorists were captured and gave all the details of their planned attack. We have all the evidence that this group was trained in Colombian territory.
Maduro also gave an update on the current COVID-19 situation in Venezuela, while also condemning the U.S. sanctions, which impede the country from buying medical supplies to fight the novel coronavirus.
Today I'm able to say that in the 8th week of quarantine, we have controlled the transmission chains of COVID-19. We're almost at the point of cutting the transmission chains. We have been able to receive international support from Cuba, which has sent an enormous team of doctors with great experience. We have also received logistic support from China and Russia. Without their support, it would have been impossible to perform the million of tests which we have done. We have 357 confirmed cases and unfortunately 10 deaths. Out of the 357 confirmed cases, 158 cases have recovered. 96 are hospitalized in public hospitals, 76 in public clinics, 22 in private clinics, and 10 deaths. Thanks to the World Health Organization, the UNICEF, we have been able to channel the arrival of humanitarian aid. Since Venezuela is submitted to a financial economic blockade by the government of the United States that impedes us from buying health medical supplies in the world.
A day before the terrorist incursion, the Venezuelan ambassador to the UN, Samuel Moncada, referred to an investigation by the Associated Press, saying it sought to clear the US and Colombia of any responsibility.
Samuel Moncada highlighted the relationship of the United States with mercenary armies, saying that for decades they have been used for clandestine warfare, avoiding any legal responsibility. Moncada pointed out that mercenaries are half as cheap as conventional troops. In Afghanistan, they made up 70% of U.S. forces, becoming the preferred method of invading countries. Between 2007 and 2017, the U.S. spent $250 billion on mercenaries in Iraq, Syria, Libya, and Ukraine. Moncada pointed out that the owner of Blackwater offered 5,000 mercenaries to invade Venezuela, something that was denounced in 2019 at the UN Security Council.
It's no longer about the use of public military forces, but of clandestine wars with mercenaries, just like in Nicaragua with the Contras.
In September of 2019, Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez also condemned mercenary camps in Colombia with support of the United States.
A serious act had been coordinated between Colombian paramilitary groups and the government of Iván Duque. Let me show you this picture of the self-proclaimed with the Los Rastrojos paramilitary group, so you can see what we are up against. These drug trafficking gangs who want to destabilize Venezuela.
Samuel Moncada also brought up denouncements which were made by Communications Minister Jorge Rodriguez in the month of March of a reported armed operation brewing in Colombia as part of Donald Trump's maximum pressure strategy.
We have denounced 6 encampments, even to the UN General Assembly. We gave them coordinates of 3 of these camps. We showed them pictures and the exact location which was given to us Fernández Figuera, a deserter of a camp led by AK Pantera.
The complaint made to the UN Security Council about undercover military operations match up with the declarations of wanted fugitive Cleaver Alcala Cordones, who is currently detained in the United States. As one of the heads of this terrorist plot, he unveiled planned assassination attempts against President Nicolas Maduro with weapons bought by U.S. agents and protected by Colombia.
Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has once again condemned the opposition's acknowledgement of Venezuela's self-proclaimed President Juan Guaido. This comes as he accused the United National Congress of lobbying for the United States to impose sanctions against the Twin Island Republic. Last week, the opposition urged the U.S. to probe claims oil sold to Aruba were eventually shipped to Venezuela. Dr. Rowley denied the allegations as an attempt to undermine the country's foreign policy, labeling it dastardly and disgusting. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. Presidents and prime ministers of countries of the non-aligned movement are holding a virtual meeting today in response to COVID-19. United Against COVID-19 has been convened by the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, in his capacity as chair of the non-aligned movement. Participants include President Miguel Díaz-Canel of Cuba, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, and the President of Iran, Hassan Rouhani. Early speakers included the chair and Azerbaijan President, W.H.O Director General, and the UN Secretary General. Outcomes of the summit will include the adoption of a declaration underlining the importance of international solidarity in the fight against COVID-19 and the establishment of a task force to develop a database reflecting the medical, social, and humanitarian needs of non-members in the fight against COVID-19.
The pandemic is worsening the pressing problems in a planet riddled with deep inequalities where 600 million people live in dire poverty and nearly half of the population have no access to basic health services, whose management is defined by the market and not by the noble goal of saving lives. In the meantime, global military expenditure is over $1.9 trillion, of which more than 38%, that is 732 billion, were appropriated in the United States in 2020. I wish to share with you this quotation from the Commander-in-Chief of the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Ruz, and I quote, "Instead of spending so much in the development of increasingly sophisticated weapons, those having resources for that should promote medical research and put the results of science at the service of humanity, thus creating tools for health and life and not for death," end quote.
President Miguel Díaz-Canel also took the opportunity to denounce the terrorist attack on its embassy in the United States.
Due to its seriousness, I must denounce the terrorist attack with an assault rifle and the firing of over 30 rounds on our embassy in Washington, D.C. on April 30th. I demand from the U.S. government a thorough and swift investigation, harsh sanctions, security measures and guarantees for our diplomatic missions in its territory, as it must under the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. We reject the recent and serious military threats by the government of the United States against the sisterly Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We reaffirm our solidarity with the government and people of Nicaragua and reject measures against our right to well-being, security, and peace. The attempts at reimposing the neocolonial past to our America by publicly declaring the validity of the Monroe Doctrine are contrary to the proclamation of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace.
In his speech, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has condemned the United States government for suspending funding to the World Health Organization, describing the behavior as irresponsible and reckless.
At a time when the World Health Organization is leading in the front line, the global battle against the threat of the coronavirus, undermining the World Health Organization would mean undermining the joint global fight against the coronavirus, and would therefore be but utterly untimely and unjustifiable. The United States government's hasty and irresponsible action in depriving the WHO of its much-needed finances should be considered yet another strategic error on the part of this administration. An error which would challenge the global joint battle against the coronavirus. Indeed, one could not have expected otherwise of a U.S. administration that has time and again withdrawn unilaterally from valid international accords and has repeatedly violated international law. With its unilateral and unlawful sanctions of years, not only has the United States of America deprived the people of Iran from access to their rights, but its measures are to be countered as a threat to multilateralism and international cooperation.
And speaking during the summit, Algeria's president called for a cessation of hostilities in Libya and Yemen to enable officials to carry out their duties to contain the COVID-19 outbreak. He also called and echoed calls for the lifting of unilateral coercive measures that are hindering the fight against the pandemic.
It appeals solemnly for an immediate cessation of all hostilities all over the world, particularly in Libya and Yemen, without losing sight of the situation in territories and countries under occupation like in Palestine. It is imperative we strive to give all players, wherever conflict exists, the opportunity to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. I also put forward the proposal to start thinking as from now on the elaboration of a work plan that enables us to alleviate as much as possible the repercussions of the pandemic everywhere in developing countries, especially in Africa, and to help revitalize all these countries which can be significantly affected by its impacts and its aftermath. Our movement principles require us to support the just causes and to disapprove unilateral measures that would hamper the international efforts to eradicate this pandemic and affect fundamental human rights.
Moving on, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has once again ignored isolation orders, greeting a crowd outside of the presidential palace. Our correspondent Brian Muir has the details.
On Sunday, in what's becoming a regular weekly tradition, far-right Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro ignored quarantine orders in the city of Brasilia and walked into a crowd of protesters in front of the presidential palace. These protesters were calling for closure of the Supreme Court, shutting down Congress, and a military coup. As Bolsonaro greeted the crowd, flanked by flags of the United States and Israel, he said that the Brazilian military is on the side of the people. Now, after the protests, several army generals announced that no, the Brazilian military is not in favor of shutting down Congress or shutting down the Supreme Court or having a military coup. But it's important to remember that there were generals who said this in 1964 as well, before the 1964 military coup against President Jango Goulart. Now, with 7,000 people now dead, according to official numbers from coronavirus, it appears that as a survival strategy for Bolsonaro's career, as he becomes more and more politically isolated, is to try and push things farther and farther right. But aerial drone footage of the protest that surfaced afterwards shows that there were little over 100 people there. So his base, which he's constantly praising on social media networks, is not as strong as him and his family have been trying to make it out to be.
We thank our correspondent Brian Muir for that report. Cuban epidemiology director for the Ministry of Health, Francisco Duran, was part of the first regional technical meeting on COVID-19 of the Association of Caribbean States. Duran took to Twitter to announce his participation on the meeting in order to share experiences, learn over the treatment of sick patients and the epidemiology protocols with better results. Cuba also shared special aspects of the virus and the protocols and treatments to deal with it. An Ecuadorian indigenous community has accused the government of abandoning them after a major oil spill in the community. Community members who live along the Coca River accused the Ecuadorian government of not fulfilling promises it made to them after oil spilled into the river last month. The spill affected over 2,000 indigenous families and left more than 120,000 people without access to clean water.
We are suffering from the damage done by the oil spill. There are no authorities here to support us. We are very, very tired. And as it reaches us, it will bring more diseases. First, there's coronavirus, and now there'll be more diseases on top of that.
Take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. The World Health Organization has rebuffed claims by the United States that the coronavirus originated in a lab in the Chinese city of Wuhan. Director of Emergencies Michael Ryan on Monday said the U.S. government has failed to provide any evidence to support its claims.
No, we have not received any data or specific evidence from the U.S. government relating to the purported origin of the virus. So, from our perspective, this remains speculative, but like any evidence-based organisation, we would be very willing to receive any information that purports to the origin of the virus, because, as Maria said, the origin of the virus is a very important piece of public health information for future control.
Chinese youths have been commended for the commitment they have shown in helping their country fight the COVID-19 pandemic. Speaking on the sidelines of the Chinese Youth Day, touted as a May 4th movement, President of the Tianjin University of Traditional Chinese Medicine, Xiang Boli, expressed gratitude to medical students for volunteering to help in hospitals as the COVID-19 took its toll on China. The day is celebrated on the 4th of May every year.
They said, I want to go. I am young, for the country and the people. We are duty-bound to go. I think it reflects the spirits of utter devotion and responsibility of this generation. That's why I say this young generation is trustworthy. They'll definitely be doing a good job, and even better than us. I'm definitely sure about that.
Public transport services have resumed in South Africa after the government eased coronavirus measures imposed 5 weeks ago. Trains and bus services between the city of Johannesburg and the capital Pretoria have reopened with stringent conditions to guarantee the safety of commuters. Train and bus carriages will be disinfected before each trip, and passengers will be required to have their temperature checked before entering stations. And still in South Africa, a technical glitch has left millions of people across the country unable to access the social grants which the government is dispersing to shield the poor from the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic. The South African Social Security Agency system was temporarily shut down after numerous glitches, including double payments in some areas and no payment in others. Officials have, however, assured beneficiaries that they are working on resolving the problem.
We can't relax when we're hungry. You can't relax. We can't. We were chased away in March. We were told to go with the lockdown. Then the lockdown was extended. And then we were given dates, come back. So it's always a day, same thing. Then we must relax. How long should we relax? How long should we relax in this country when things go wrong?
Russia has surpassed 145,000 cases of the coronavirus. Officials have reported 10,581 new infections over the last 24 hours, 52 less than Sunday's record, and 1,356 patients have unfortunately passed away. Despite the rise in cases, the number of people dying from the pandemic have remained low compared to other countries such as Italy, Spain, and the United States. The United Stock Exchange has fallen once again as the Trump administration continues with its onslaught on China. The market's drop follows a negative sentiment which the U.S. president repeated recently, blaming China for alleged mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Last week, Trump also threatened that he was going to punish Beijing by imposing additional tariffs, a move which was criticized by investors as a grave mistake. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And be sure to follow us on social media as well. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and of course on Instagram. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at Ebravo Telesur. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.
为了保持身体健康